So the main thing is to be able to help you go through whatever transition, to gain traction in your life, to make a decision, to kind of point you in a direction. You want to be in touch with your genius. And when you can align yourself with that, your path is going to be really powerful.
Yeah.
You know? And so my work is to help people recognize how to get closer and closer to that within themselves. I want everybody to know you have a genius. It's not BS. It's not a fantasy. You have a genius. It's a real thing. Just because it's not part of our culture necessarily doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. If you look back into history all around the world, most cultures had a concept of genius of somehow, of people coming and being born with a special message to give or a special service to provide, right?
There comes a time in our lives when we think that we have it all figured out. Career, personal life, faith, you name it. And because things seem to come in complete alignment. Then something happens that shakes the foundation of what we thought was just so solid. What do we do then? Well, it starts with a journey of the soul. And today, my guest shares with us a pathway to finding our genius. And in the meantime, before we get into all that, I just want to remind you, if you're interested in raising your standards as a father, a husband, and entrepreneur, then I encourage you to start your hero's quest. In this program, you'll accomplish more, develop more, and become more in the next 90 days than you ever have. And you can get more information about this at the Awakened Man Training Academy at members.theawakenedman.net. And with that, let's get on with today's episode.
The average man today is sleepwalking through life. Many never reaching their true potential, let alone ever crossing the finish line to living a purposeful life. Yet, the hunger still exists, albeit buried amidst his cluttered mind, misguided beliefs, and values that no longer serve him. It's time to align yourself for greatness. It's time to become a revolutionary man. Stay strong, my brother.
Welcome, everyone, to the Revolutionary Man podcast. I'm the founder of the Awakened Man movement and your host, Alan Devonso. Do you know what your purpose is? And if not, do you even know how to find it? There's many ways that we can find our life purpose or mission. And while there are many ways that each of us takes time and effort for us to truly uncover and find out what it is. And this journey of clarity is what changes our lives from standing on the sidelines to playing the leading role. And today, my guest reveals his journey to living his purpose and how we can do the same for ourselves. So allow me to introduce my guest. Ben Hummell is a licensed psychotherapist, an author, a spiritual counselor, and a teacher. He's the creator of the Genius Way life skills system, which helps people of all ages and backgrounds to uncover and express their unique gifts, genius gifts, and calling for more of a fulfilling life. Ben offers inspiration, encouragement, tools, and support for those on the path of personal growth in the form of therapy, coaching, workshops, and online courses that can all be found at www.thegeniusway.com. Welcome to the show, Ben. How are things today, my friend?
Good. Hi, Alan. Nice to see you. Happy to be here.
Yeah, it's outstanding to have you here today. Beautiful sunny day here up in Canada. I know we were just talking before getting on. You're in California, so we're finally getting some nice warm weather that you folks get to enjoy a little more than we do.
Yeah, we're very spoiled down here with that.
Yeah, it's outstanding.
Yeah.
Right
so
on.
I look forward to our conversation.
Absolutely. So in our work here at the Awakened Man, we always talk about every one of us being on a hero's quest. And so my first question for my guests is to talk a little bit about their journey, their life journey, and specifically tell us about a time in your life when you knew things had to change. What did you do about it, and how did that experience shape you into the man you are today and the work that you're doing?
I would say probably the most challenging thing for me was when I was coming out of being part of a spiritual group. And I had been in the group for quite a long time. And in it, I was a teacher and a counselor and so forth. And as would happen, it's a very common tale that the leader becomes corrupt and the group breaks up and everybody's devastated. So that was my story too. Okay.
Yeah.
And so coming out of that, I had a lot of disorientation and, crisis of faith. My whole identity was wrapped up in that, and I need to find out, okay, after this, what still lasts, what exists, what is still there in me. And so a lot of deep soul searching. And eventually I thought I found the best path for me was to find that part that was always there in service to others, in terms of helping others to stay on their path, helping others to, navigate their spiritual and psychological development. I went back and got my graduate degree, got my license as a therapist. I'm licensed in Washington, Oregon, and California. So I have the whole West Coast as my clients. But then that was just still a little bit too limiting. It wasn't really hitting on the mark. And so I came up on this idea of genius from a couple lectures by Michael Meade, who's a great mythologist. I don't know if you know who he is, but he's a great guy. And he actually wrote a blurb for my first book about genius. And anyway, he was talking about genius as this sense of self, this guiding spirit that everybody's born with. And I got really intrigued. And the deeper I looked into it, I found out this is my path as well, to help people literally and practically find their own genius. And I'm talking about not the Mozart genius or the Einstein genius. I'm talking about the everyday genius, which deals directly with that person's life purpose.
Oh man, I just love that. I just taken a ton of notes here right out of the gate. I just think it's so important that you hit on a couple of really key things that I want to just dive a little bit deeper. And you talked about having a crisis of faith, and I think about how many of us have that, whether we were spiritual or raised in a religious community or not. We have that times. And tell me a little bit more about how that crisis of faith that you had to go through, and maybe even with your clients, of how that really rocks the foundation of who we are. Because a lot of us we feel that, I think, that purpose is around faith. And when that isn't there, and when that starts to shake, it really can leave us in a vulnerable spot.
Yeah. So faith gets rocked. So I'm going to put on a couple hats here.
Yeah.
Faith gets rocked when there's a big transition in our life that takes us from something that we know into the unknown. Okay. And it's usually something really devastating. For me, it was a loss of identity. Like, who I was in that spiritual group was now gone because the group is gone. And that meant my friends, my family, my businesses, everything, including how do I connect with God, spirit, universe, all that, that was all in question now.
Yeah.
And so to put on the psychological hat, you got to talk about schemas. And so, have you heard that word?
Yes, I have.
Yeah. So I want to just explain what I mean by schema in terms of psychology. Think about it this way. Let's say that your basic identity is like a platform that's held up by 7 posts. Okay. And the posts are your schemas. And those schemas are unconscious assumptions about how the world works and how everything fits together. And they're so deeply unconscious that we don't know that we have them. But we do know when 1 or 2 of them gets knocked out, then the whole world feels unstable. And we can't really tell why. We just know it feels really bad. Okay. Wow. And so the crisis of faith is about, wow, the world is different than I thought it was. And now but I don't have a different pillar to hold up that part of my foundational self. Okay. And so it's a deep trauma, but they do get rebuilt with something that makes more sense, something that is more appropriate for who you are now. And it does get built, but it is very disorienting for a while.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense too, because when the way you describe that about these pillars, right? And they're so deeply unconscious that we don't recognize them until one gets knocked off.
That's right.
And you can see that. I could sense that when that happens, how those times in our lives where we feel disoriented, as you talked about earlier, and we're not sure where that comes from. And that's really where some of your work comes into. And I want to talk about the next part was you talked about what I really appreciate about your work is about taking it from something that is abstract and putting it into a practical application. And so in your practice, what do you find are some common or maybe unique stories that men share about when they're dealing with maybe one of those unconscious pillars of really being able to deal with grief and depression, for example?
Yeah. So grief, depression, anxiety all come from, their outpourings or reactions to some of these schemas being disturbed. It's always a shift in identity somehow by some kind of occurrence in their life, either a divorce or, some kind of loss or the loss of a job. I mean, even the loss of a pet. I mean, it could be anything that really changes what circumstances are in your life. Okay. And so there's always the individual identity piece. Okay. And so when we're working with identity and working with like the loss of identity, the next thing is to find a truer and more appropriate current identity. Okay, so it always gets replaced. And so here's where the genius way comes in. We all are born with a genius. We all are born with a package of self-expression. And I'll go into this a little bit more, later on in our talk. But this self-expression is before anything happens to us, before any psychological wounds, before anything. We're born with that, right? And it's kind of like our individual mandate to bring that out. The only problem is nobody teaches us how to do that. Only if we're really lucky, we'll have a parent who's very aware and will help us bring that out, right? And just on that note itself. So the word education comes from the Latin word educare, basically, which means to bring forth someone's genius, to bring something out that they have within them. Okay. So when you're at a crossroads in your life and there's a big transition happening and you're going to replace that pillar with something, it's important to know I have a genius that I've probably been ignoring and I want to replace it with something connected to that. I want to start identifying with a deep part of myself that I was born with that nobody taught me how to get to. Right. And so bringing that part out at that point, like during a midlife crisis or any kind of transition, that's an opportune time because something's going to be changing anyway. It's better to get in touch with something authentic in you rather than to pick something out of the air to identify with.
That makes complete sense to me. And what I'm thinking of is some of the levels of the levels of enlightenment, for lack of a better term, that where we go through life as to me, by me, through me, and as me. And you've probably heard it in different ways, but that's how I've come to understand that process. And when we can take that opportunity to truly understand that piece of us where that's coming, then we can start to make some profound shifts and changes in our life. And so I really wanted to have this conversation with you because I think it's such profound work, and it's work that I find more and more men are starting to wake up to and want to explore this, because we are struggling with who we are as men, as identity. So much of our lives are tied to our profession, to external pieces, right? Success and money and fame and that. And when we don't have that, or we don't get to achieve that as our lives go on, then we tend to struggle. And so I think this piece that you're talking about makes so much sense to me.
Right. Yeah. And so in terms of, rebuilding after a storm in your life, the reason it's important to rebuild with your authenticness, or we'll call it your genius now, is because the genius is expressive. In other words, so in my book, The Genius Way, Expressing Your Unique Gifts, that's my second book, I've identified 2 drives. And when we talk about drive theory in psychology, it's like it's a motivation to express, to act. Okay. And so I've identified two drives: the wound drive and the genius drive. Okay, so the wound drive is, everybody gets wounded in their life, psychologically, emotionally, physically, even. And that effort is what most people spend their entire lives doing, is healing the psychological wounds of their childhood. Okay, that's kind of why therapists are in business. It happens that way. Sorry. And that's good work. It's all important. But there's another drive. There's another impetus of expression. That's the genius drive. That's the thing you were born to express. It's like a basket full of gifts and callings and things that you're good at that matter to you, right? And in order to get to that, you got to see that the genius drive is all about outward expression. Okay, so there's a fund of expressive energy there. And when you tap into it, and it's your genius, it's that thing that you always have time for, you always have energy for, even if you're tired, you're like, yeah, this is good. It affects people positively when you're expressing it, right? And I've noticed, like, I work with my clients with this, either I do genius coaching and I also obviously do psychotherapy. But when I see that somebody's on their genius topic, sit up more straight, their eyes will open, they'll start speaking with a sense of authority, the energy starts coming out. There's a bunch of telltale signs that you can see. And I start getting excited because I'm like, wow, here's the authority on this thing. Whether it's about, making spreadsheets to organize somebody's business or whatever it is, it doesn't matter what it is. It's just, what is it to that person?
Yes.
Because everybody's got something that's in that package of expression. So the main thing is that something wants to be expressed. So it's not just you having to struggle to express something. It's just like finding a path for your genius, and then it's all there.
Geez, I just love that. And thank you for making it like, I would never have expected an example of a spreadsheet. And I think,
that's a literal example that I've come across.
I can well imagine. Otherwise it wouldn't have showed up. Right. And and just to think, because how many people are sitting here, and I forget it. I'll just, truth be told, I can remember back in high school trying to decide, what do I want to be when I grow up? And one of the things that from the aptitude tests we used to take was being an accountant. And I liked numbers and that, but I just thought to myself, I was fairly athletic back then. I thought, there's no way I'm going to sit there and look at spreadsheets all day. But I'll tell you, my career, it's pretty much what I do. I'm not an accountant, but you're looking at spreadsheets. But if we had the wherewithal and had a mentor such as yourself to help point us to, that's probably a genius piece for you.
That is definitely, it's what I've recognized as part of my genius, is to kind of help people on this path of finding what that special thing is for them. And that's, I've created a process around that in this second book. And, I've got a lot of other irons in the fire to keep developing this thing, because it's like an endless amount of, it's an endless amount of work. To be able to.
And it's really good work. I wanted to touch a little bit on your first book, Summoning Genius. And it's where you help people answer the question, what now? And I really like that. Boy, that's so profound. And with this focus on most of us being in midlife crisis, how does this message, this what now message, work for younger folks and older folks? Those of us that are maybe at the start of our lives journey, but those of us that are maybe a little closer to the sunset part of our journey.
So the what next part, so the first book, Summoning Genius, was about going through midlife, referencing your own genius. Okay, using genius as a way to help you go through the transformation. But it can certainly be used for people way before the midlife time, and also way after it, because we're consistently going through transitions in our lives. Okay. We talked about that a little bit earlier than that. So the main thing is to be able to help you go through whatever transition, to gain traction in your life, to make a decision, to kind of point you in a direction. You want to be in touch with your genius. Okay. Like you were saying, well, I took an aptitude test and, maybe be an accountant or a firefighter or, who knows what it is, forest ranger or a baseball player, and it's important not to just pick something out of the air because we already have something. And when you can align yourself with that, your path is going to be really powerful.
Yeah.
And so my work is to help people recognize how to get closer and closer to that within themselves. It's not me teaching them techniques. It's about how to deeply listen to yourself and find that space where your genius qualities are. And that's that space I call the Prima conscious. And so I'm say a little bit about the Prima conscious.
Yeah,
and then while we're on the thing. So the Prima conscious that's something that I came up with. It's a concept that I came up with after a lot of deliberation, because I needed a way to explain that expressive energy. Because like the unconscious, you can suppress things and push things down, and then things can come out of your unconscious as well, right? And so the Prima conscious is different. It's only expressive. Nothing goes into it. Okay, it's like the treasure chest that you bring with you, that's given to you by existence when you're born. Here's your chest and all your provisions for your journey in this life. You don't put stuff into it. It's all about, oh, when I go to this island, I'll have this stuff to trade. When I go here, I'll have a sail for my boat. When I go here, you have all your materials in that box, right? That's your genius. Okay. And so the Prima conscious is only about outward expression. Okay. And so when you're going through a transition, it's important to get in touch with, what do I have in my own treasure box? What do I have in my own genius? Because it wants to be used. It wants to be spent. That treasure wants to be, used for your journey. That's what it's for your transitions, for your midlife crisis, for your, all these things. We have this fund of expressive energy. And that's expressing that energy is linked directly to life purpose. Think about it just like, like an apple tree. The more apples you pick, the more the tree is going to give you apples. Okay. And so if you don't pick them, the apple tree is going to be like, well, I made a bunch, nobody's eating them, so I guess I don't need to make that many. Right. But it's there to give the fruit. And the same thing with each human being. We have this fruit, we have this offering, these expressions to give. And the more you give it and empty out, the more comes out of that treasure chest, but part of it is giving it, is expressing it.
Yeah.
That's part of it.
It's like the never ending tickle trunk, the thing that allows us to, it's about taking the how to do things and really leaning into that, back to really that faith piece for ourselves, right? And really understanding where our genius resides, and it doesn't reside somewhere else in somebody else or for somebody else. It's really for us.
Right.
So what do you find is the greatest challenge then, right? That in working with clients and working with people and in getting them through their life transition?
Well, no matter what we're working on, in every one, there is a common theme. And I'll say almost literally without exception. And that is the issue of self-judgment.
Interesting.
Okay. One of the exercises that I do in my workshops, we do some Rorschach tests, which are like ink blot tests. I hold a bunch of them up and everybody says what they see in the ink blot. And it's a projective test because, whatever we're bringing with us is what we'll see there. And then I give everyone a handheld mirror and I have them look in the mirror. Okay, what do you see? And almost without exception, there's criticism. Oh, I'm too old, I'm too ugly, I'm too fat, I'm too wrinkled, I'm too whatever, right? And that's the absolute obstacle to finding your genius and to kind of moving forward with your life. right? So no matter what you're working on, there also has to be an amount of self-acceptance, just as you are, a good, healthy amount. And so there was a psychologist named Carl Rogers. He was a humanistic psychologist, and he coined the phrase unconditional positive regard. And what that meant was the therapist works with the client and just is there and accepts the person just as they are and is completely supportive, unconditionally. And so in my book, The Genius Way, I talk about unconditional positive self-regard as a way to do this kind of work. It doesn't mean you give yourself carte blanche to be an idiot and do all these terrible things. What it means is that this is hard work. And while you're doing it, to suspend that criticism, right, so that you can actually experiment, make mistakes, get back up, try it again. That unconditional, like, hey, I'm on your side, like being your own best friend as you're working, right? So that's what I try to instill with my clients, that quality that they should have gotten from their parents or their elders, and most likely didn't. Mm-hmm. So to build that quality in oneself, that's how you end up doing great things.
Yeah, it makes complete sense to me, for sure. And because once we start to do that work, regardless of where we are, what stage in life that we're at, that we can start to then recognize and really pull out that genius way. And so in getting ready for our discussion today, I recognize that in your work, that this foundation, that this genius work has really came out of the Greco-Roman piece. And so I wanted to touch a little bit on that, and a little bit dive into a little bit also with Mead's work and how you were able to put these concepts together to create what ultimately came out as your second book, The Genius Way, and your 10-step process.
Yeah. So everybody knows, so when I was coming up with the idea for what I wanted to do in terms of like the big idea for The Genius Way, which is my, the name of my brand, basically. I thought long and hard of like, geez, do I want to call it genius? Because everybody's just going to think of Einstein. Because, and so I'm like, okay, there's a learning curve here. I've got to re-educate people on what genius really means. So if we go back and go to the etymology of the word, it goes back to a Latin word, a couple Latin words. One of them is genere, which is to beget, to father, to create in that way, right? And to sustain.
Right.
Okay, genere. And so the original Greco-Roman idea of genius is basically like a guardian spirit that gets born with each human being, that guards not just their physicality, but guards their talents and callings until a time when it's ready for them to express them. So to make sure that never gets lost, because that's what's unique about the individual, and the individual is supposed to be unique. Right? And so that's kind of the beginning of this genius that I'm talking about here. Okay. And in terms of like figuring out like, okay, so, Michael's a really great guy, and he's really opened a lot of people up to the idea of genius, and I've been to a couple of his seminars, and people just get very, very excited to hear that, hey, I've got this thing within me, and that's cool and everything. And then at this one seminar, this woman kind of turned around, who was sitting in front of me. I didn't know her. She's like, okay, but how do you do it? How do I find it? And a light bulb went on. I'm like, that's my job. That's my job. Okay. And so that's where I came up with this. I need to find a practical process for people to literally find their genius.
Yeah.
Okay. And so that's exactly one of the motivations, because I knew this was part of my journey, and then I kind of found it right there. Perfect. Practical application of it.
Absolutely, because sometimes I know I find in my journey in doing men's work here that I find that there's no shortage of intellectual information, right, to get in there, and the challenge is to be able to take that and get that journey from our minds into our hearts, and ultimately embody and actually live it. And I think at least in our terminology, we talk about that. That's what we mean by living a life of fulfillment, when we can actually express that peace.
That's what makes a difference right there. Taking it from your head into your heart.
Yeah. And it's it's only 18-inch journey, but it's a darn long one.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. It's a long one.
It is.
Let's get into a little bit about the practical aspect of it. You created a 10-step process, and then how, without necessarily revealing all of the 10 steps, tell us what are some key components on that journey of that process.
Well, I'll tell you my favorite one. And, so there's all kinds of, think about the 10 steps. What I call them are life skills. And so with each life skill in the book, one of either my clients or coaching clients or students, and what they've gone through, and, everything's been changed. So it's all anonymous, but here's a typical situation this person went through. And this is the life skill that they need to develop, to work on that. And it all points to genius. So you think of these 10 life skills as 10 arrows, like pointing in towards the center. They're all pointing kind of directly there, but you need all of these things to find the whole picture. And so one of them is the idea of the pre-wounded self. And so the life skill and the new learning in the book is about how to connect to my pre-wounded self. And so by pre-wounded self, I mean, before society got a hold of us, before the tough experiences, some people's wounding starts at birth. I had cesarean, and that's been, my therapist is a rich person from working on that, with me over the years, So the pre-wounded self is basically the genius that we were born with that is still not wounded. In other words, think about it having, let's say, a dozen red threads that we start our life with.
Yeah.
And that's our development, our spiritual development, our psychological development. And some of the threads now by this time are very long, and some are very short, right? And so when we get wounded in our life, psychologically, however we get wounded, and everybody gets wounded, some of those threads just stay short. Okay. But it's a good thread. And that thread, if you pull on it, is only going to go one place. And so that self, before they're wounded, has an intact trajectory where I'm going to go right to that beautiful genius expression. If you just let me grow, And so now that we've gone through, as men, men and women, but we're on a men's show. As we've grown into adults, we get to go back to that thread and start pulling on it. Okay. We're not creating this direction. We're just letting it grow again, because we can.
Yeah.
We can see past I got wounded there, but I can go back to that place that still is innocent and connected to existence, and all those good qualities, and keep developing that pre-wounded sense of self. And that leads directly to your genius and your genius expression. Okay, so that's one of the lessons. So each one of these life skills, there's a guided visualization that helps you to bring content out of your Prima conscious. That's why I mentioned Prima conscious before. In the Prima conscious, there is information about what your genius is. And it's not unconscious, it's the Prima conscious. That holds the genius material. And so the guided visualization, the guided journey that I take you on, helps bring that material out, so that by the end of that lesson, you know something about your genius. You write it down, right? Every one of these life skills, you literally have a few facts that you learned from what you brought out of your Prima conscious about what your genius is. And you collect these, and at the end of the book, you kind of distill them into basically like a mission statement about what your genius is. So it's a pretty cool process.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds phenomenal. And what a great example. Thank you so much of using that pre-wounded self, because a lot of our work, especially in today's work with men's work, is really dealing with the wound, whether it be a father wound or mother wound, some wound that we're trying to heal from past trauma. And there's different ways to approach it. And what I really like about our conversation today is that it feels practical. It feels masculine, that it's something that guys can sink their teeth into and do, because what you've done. How I've interpreted it, Ben, is that what you've done is you've taken the intellectual part that we still like to do as guys, so we have some work to do, and then we can take a little bit of self-reflection with the guided meditation to go and carry that work through. And so I think that's such a powerful combination.
And keep in mind, working with the wound is incredibly important, right? I know you know that, but I just want to tell whoever's listening to this, it's not one or the other, right? Working with the wound is important, but healing your wound is never going to help you express your original genius expression. Genius is about expressing something new. Working with wounds is about returning to a state of wholeness and healing. And they're both good, but the genius is like, I'm an individual. I have something to say, not from my ego, but from my authenticity. And it's new because the world hasn't seen this before, and it will never see it again. So that's the exciting part about the genius aspect of the pre-wound itself, right? Absolutely. But they're both important.
Yeah, great clarity. Love that. That's perfect.
Yeah.
Throw on your journey. What would you say was the best piece of advice you've been given?
Ooh, I've been given a lot of advice, and I've had my ears perked for advice ever since I was a little boy. Wow. I guess what's coming to me right now is don't stop. That's what's coming to me right now. Because everything keeps moving. Somehow, some way, it moves, right? And no matter where you feel you're at right now, it will change. And when you're on the trail of your genius, it's going to change in a direction where it'll be very, very fulfilling for you. So don't stop.
Jeez, love that. Love that.
Yeah.
Of everything that we spoke about today, and maybe there's something we didn't get a chance to touch on, Ben, what would be the one takeaway that you want our listeners to have?
I want everybody to know you have a genius. It's not BS. It's not a fantasy. You have a genius. It's a real thing. Just because it's not part of our culture necessarily doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. If you look back into history all around the world, most cultures had a concept of genius of somehow, of people coming and being born with a special message to give or a special service to provide, right? And your genius is real. It's important that you find it. It's not only important to you, it's important to everybody that you come in contact with. Absolutely. And so just imagine everybody experiencing and expressing their genius, how beautiful our existence would be.
Absolutely. That's outstanding. What a great way to sum it up. I just want to say once again, Ben, thank you so much for being on the show.
Absolutely.
What an outstanding conversation. And you've left us with enough breadcrumbs that we can start to get a picture of what potentially our genius would be. But if someone wanted to dive deeper into your work, what would be the best way for them to get a hold of you?
Yeah, the best way is just go to my website, thegeniusway.com. All my information is on there. I've got my books for sale, online courses, whatever workshops are going to be there. You can sign up for a free membership and get access to my free resource library that I keep adding little meditations and exercises to. It's an ongoing live kind of site, and it's the best way to learn more about the Genius Way. You can find me on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and YouTube as well. I post almost daily on that.
Right on. I'll make sure all those links are in the show notes for today's episode, so people get an opportunity to reach out and spend some time with you. I just want to say once again, thank you so much, Ben. It was an outstanding conversation today.
Nice talking to you too.
Thank you for listening to the Revolutionary Man podcast. Are you ready to own your destiny? to become more the man you are destined to be? Join the brotherhood that is The Awakened Man at theawakenedman.net and start forging a new destiny today.